to be here. Today's topic is about being an ally and what does that mean? And like I said earlier, I want this to be a conversation around not just how we operate within the workplace, but just generally in life. And so there's a lot to get through. Let me walk you through the agenda. But first and foremost, a little bit about me. So I come to you from a very diverse background. Born and raised in Manhattan, New York. I now live in Arizona, but so happy to still be able to do programming with the great state of New York. I am a New York licensed attorney. I'm a DEI and HR professional. I'm a coach, a speaker, author, blogger, podcaster. I do a lot, very Caribbean in nature. But of all the things that I do, I think being a speaker has been just such a wonderful experience to be able to talk on subjects, especially near and dear to my heart, like the practice of allyship, because it has made a lot of difference in my own life. I don't think I would have been able to have certain career opportunities or be in a space of leadership if other women that look like me and didn't look like me, and men similarly, do lend lend their privilege to support me, lend an ear to help hear me out, and then also provide the strategies and techniques that are needed for you to be able to grow in your career or in life. So allyship means the most. And so I also like to think through just every day kind of like life lessons. And to this day, I would say just like never stop learning has been really critical for me. It's a lot, especially within the context of allyship, but just understanding the world is ever evolving and ever changing. And so as long as you can be on a commitment of learning and be on a journey of like, I don't know, but I'm excited to do more and learn more, I think that, life can be that more fruitful and that more enjoyable. So for today, we're going to break down the topic as follows. First, let's just have common language, right? I think that when we talk about sometimes new topics for ourselves, it's important to just what does this mean? So what is allyship? And then we'll go down into talking about aggression, specifically macro versus micro. Sometimes people confuse them and they can be very different in the impact. Then we'll get right into benefits of allyship. Let's like hammer that out. Best practices, because there are some, what to avoid as an ally, and then key opportunities to practice it, and then some words of wisdom. So a lot to go through, but we're here. So what is allyship? So allyship is really taking the time to do something. It's ongoing action, and it is usually going to be for the benefit of others who could benefit from the practice of it. So we're talking about marginalized people, so Black, women, LGBTQ plus IA. We're talking about people who typically have been historically ignored, say in the workplace, or ignored for promotions, ignored for career pathing, things like that. But again, you can take that context and put it out in real life as well. So people who need help, who are provided that help through the practice of allyship. And I do want to hone in on the idea that privilege is something that we all have. It's not something we can deny. It's not something that is like, oh, like maybe I don't know. No, we all carry privilege. We just have different privilege. And the key with owning and accepting that reality is then you can leverage your privilege to help others. So it is really helpful, for instance, in the workplace, say in male dominated workplace. Men who take the opportunity to practice allyship with the few women, say, in their workplace could be meaningful. They could help her get promoted. They could help her navigate through some ambiguity that she faces in her career. It is quintessential for us as different people and different communities to come together through allyship to then everyone kind of move forward and get a piece of the pie, because there's enough of the pie for all of us. And that is, practicing allyship is one way to be able to kind of move the needle for different communities. All right, so macro versus microaggressions. This is a hard one, but it's a reality. So when we think about macroaggressions, this is something that's overt. This is something that's super intentional. This is also something that could involve hate speech or physical violence or just being excluded from something because of a specific identifier that you hold. This is typically, I would say, not as apparent in workplaces. I mean, it can be if it's like a super toxic environment, it can be. But what's more critical and what people try to deny, and this is the one that needs a little bit more attention, I would say, is microaggressions, because it's a lot more subtle. It's not so much in your face. And, sometimes it can be unintentional. It depends on the intent, of the person. I would say when dealing with people, there's like two main I words to think about: intent and impact. Right. And so with macroaggressions, intent is there. People, if you're doing a macroaggression, you are intending to cause harm. But with microaggression, you could actually just be acting from a space of ignorance. You could be acting from a space of like, I didn't know that would hurt your feelings. And maybe they should, but again, we can't assume what people will know and not know. But that harm happens for both macro and micro. There's going to be harm. And so even if you don't intend to hurt someone's feelings, if you have the impact of harm, then we have to what? We have to have change behavior. We have to modify our actions, modify the way we're thinking, and then also just, again, put that mirror in our face and just try to understand, what are we doing here? How are we being received in the world? So microaggressions can show up in ways of us assuming the abilities or intelligence of another person based on their identity, their race, their gender, things like that. It could be asking inappropriate questions, especially like in the workplace of, say, for instance, a woman has to leave the job maybe a little bit earlier than, say, some of her counterparts on her team, asking like, why are you leaving? Or assuming that maybe she's leaving due to a domestic care situation. Wildly inappropriate and deeply harmful, right, to her. And it's invalidating and it's demoralizing and it's dehumanizing, because people have different things going on in our life, but we don't want to make assumptions about anyone's capabilities. We don't want to make assumptions around what's driving people's decisions. We want to just treat people with respect. And both spaces of macro and micro aggressions really undermine that. And it's frustrating as a person who's been on the receiving end of it numerous occasions. It hurts every single time. And we don't want to deny people's feelings when they experience this. And what I have seen, which is where allyship really shows up, is when we witness people causing that harm to others, then we have to not just be silent, right? Not just be in a space of uncomfortability, but actually do something about it, right? That is where allyship shows up. Because, for instance, I have been in a situation like young when I was in college where someone attacked me because they were, I guess, mad that I was a Black person in the room and didn't feel like a Black person should be present, right? Something to that effect. And the people that were sitting with me did not look like me, did not come from my background. But the saddest part about it is these quote unquote friends did and said nothing, right? And sometimes that can be just as equally painful as being attacked. I mean, I'd never been attacked in that manner before, but when people stand by and do nothing, that is deeply hurtful, because you then feel even more isolated, even more like you don't belong. And that when people claim to, support you and they don't show up when they can in those critical moments, that is just really hard for people to then trust. And especially like in the workplace, that's where we need to build that trust. And that's where we have to make sure that we are training people to understand that when we see these types of aggressions in the workplace or in life, that we stop and say something, right? The New York phrase, see something, say something, totally applies outside of the train system or transit system. we've got to say something, so just a little bit on that. Now we can walk through benefits. And some of these I think should be like very intuitive, but I think if there's any questions, definitely, come off of mute, let me know. First, it's going to create community, right? So when we have folks that are, that question their sense of belonging, when they know they have an ally in the workplace, they can take down that wall. They can feel a little bit more secure. They can be more forthright with their personal life, because especially like say in the workplace, people may not always feel comfortable sharing what they do on the weekend or sharing more about who they are or their partners. When they have people who take an interest in understanding who the person is behind the screen, who the person is in front of them, that's when we start to have more trust built. And when team members say trust each other, they can what? They can work better together. They can be more productive. They can be more in sync with each other. So that's super critical. And then in life, a lot of I forget the article I read, but typically it seems like in the last like 5-10 years, maybe a little bit even longer, most neighbors don't know each other, right? Like people just live willy-nilly by themselves with their families, whatever, but they don't know each other. And that's really challenging, because if people don't know each other in the neighborhood, what does that mean? If there's ever a crisis, if there's ever an issue, do you have anyone that you can go to? Do you feel comfortable sharing, oh, this is a crisis that you're dealing with? No, because there's no trust, there's no community. So just it works in the kind of the locality of where you live to where you work. And everything in between it. There's not one space that doesn't allow for better connection through allyship. So it's just like something to think about. Now, what I have personally experienced as well as witnessed is when we have allies in communities, work, life, anything in between, you can help amplify the voices of others. Because why? Sometimes voices that are speaking that look like me may not be welcome or heard in all spaces, right? But when you have someone who doesn't say look like me or doesn't come from that narrative, if they nod to that marginalized person in the room, sometimes other people in that room will pay attention. Sometimes they'll stop what they're doing to give energy and give life to that marginalized voice. And that's how we can have change. That's how we can have awareness around different movements. The Me Too movement, that picked up a whole lot of steam and a whole lot of traction when an ally, I think Alyssa Moreno, is that her name? Yeah. That she kind of stumbled across it through social media. And then all of a sudden, everyone and their mama now knows about the Me Too movement. But the leader, the original leader of that movement had been doing this work for 10 years, right? And it's so interesting where someone could be diligently working really hard on something, but if the right folks aren't paying attention, it goes unheard. It goes without any type of traction. But when allyship is practiced, then you can have national, international attention on something. And for things around women's safety in the workplace, women being safe in the world needs more attention more than ever, right? So that's another prime example. And then greater understanding of each other and ourselves can happen through allyship, because when allies, again, take the time to listen, listening is critical. Hearing the perspectives of other people that don't look like you, that don't come from your background, you can start to understand new traumas. You can also start to understand new challenges and obstacles that people are facing. And if you are one who has never experienced that, you probably have not thought about what traumas are that's happening in other communities, what poverty really looks like. I know in my own life, until I dealt with, like, say, for instance, financial struggles, I never really, I cared about the homeless population, but when you then become homeless, right, like it becomes a whole other aspect of understanding and empathy that builds. Right. And it's funny because life is really, you only learn because it's a lived experience. So sadly, so many of us, until we go through something, we don't learn from that. But instead of always having to throw yourself into the shoes of others, because maybe you don't want to be in that situation, we could take a toe out into the water and we can listen, right? And we can ask questions and we can try to get out of the me-centric existence that so many of us are in, of the me, and focus on, well, what's going on with them? And why should I care? And why is it hurting them? What's the harm? Maybe you don't understand. Maybe you hear the story and it's still like, you're still not getting it. Listen, ask questions, get deeper, greater understanding. Positive change is going to happen from this, because it is going to be really hard for someone who puts themselves in a space of allyship to hear and help and listen and not want to put time or put resources or put attention behind what that marginalized person and voice is saying. Because typically, you can't speak on all, but typically human beings, when we hear and see the hurt of others, it makes us have to pause whatever we're doing and try to say, okay, well, how can I help? right? Like that's the natural inclination, especially for those who maybe lean a little bit more on the being empathetic in nature. But generally, it's really hard, right, to see an article and say, for instance, like what's going on with like schools and guns and violence, right? Things like that. To like read articles or hear things about massive death and just be like, cool, what am I watching on Netflix today, right? Like usually it causes you to pause and want to do something about it. And so that's where you can start to have more traction behind movement. And typically you will see that it's going to put things forth in a more rapid space, as if more allies come behind something. And it's sad that it takes that, but at the end of the day, as long as we have traction, as long as we have movement, that's the hope that we need to have and create, essentially. And then of course building stronger relationships. And this is really, again, this ties back a lot into the workplace, but also just in life. It's a lot easier to trust people, to like people, to want to spend time with people when we have a deeper understanding with each other. And so allyship, by forcing you to kind of sit down with self, try to understand what are some of the biases you're holding, what are some of the beliefs that you have, and how can you dispel them? How can you unlearn them? A lot of that happens through having friends and people in different communities that look and feel and completely come from a completely different background than you, for you to then start to see the world a little bit differently, for you to start to care about things a little bit differently. And then you're going to have a stronger relationship with those people who you're constantly kind of building this allyship or practicing this allyship with. So, a lot there. So what are some best practices if you're starting your journey, or if you're like, nope, I'm already an ally, Natasha? Cool, that's awesome. Let's go through it. Okay, so I said it before, I'll say it again: listening. A lot of us do what? We do a lot of talking in this life, a lot of talking. That's wonderful. I never want someone to silence themselves at all. Please, please, please share your thoughts, share your perspective. But especially with the practice of allyship, it's not always about like what you have experienced or what you're going through. Sometimes it's about you sitting down and just listening and hearing someone talk through their trauma. And maybe you have the inclination to want to fix, right? Yes, we can get there first. First, we have to just listen. We have to listen and hear people, because for marginalized folks, say in life or in the workplace, they really struggle even having people listen to them, because there's so many people who are telling them to kind of get past their feelings, or well, that person didn't really mean that way, or they have a bias towards the actor that is causing harm for that person, and so they feel conflicted, or they feel incapable of being able to effectuate any type of change. Whatever the scenario is, first just give that person the respect and the dignity they need to listen, to understand, and then start to ask them how they want to solve, how, if there's a solution to be had, or maybe it is just a session to hear someone, let them have the, let it kind of get out of their system and move on. Or maybe it is an opportunity for change, and then asking that person to help you figure out what would make them more comfortable. What are ways you could help empower them in that situation? Because you don't want to practice or put your solution onto them, right? They need to help get to their own space of solution and help understand where you can plug in if needed. But really that listening piece is key. Education, this is like lifelong lesson. You're never going to know all the terminology. You're never all going to learn all the different practices that are happening, all the different types of harms that are occurring. Like it's endless, and it gets more nuanced, and it changes, and there's just, our world is super beautiful but super complex. So there's always going to be space for you to be like, oh, okay, I didn't know about this, or oh, this is how we can approach this, and this is how you want to identify it, right? Like there's always just going to be all these different things going on within DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and outside of that. So please, 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 like, Google is your best friend, your library is your best friend. Constantly be learning, constantly spend intentional time daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly to be learning, listening, doing more trainings, going to conferences, reading new books, new articles, there's podcasts, so many different spaces, so many different voices that are speaking through things like allyship. Stay abreast of what's going on. We talked about privilege again. Think through your own privilege. Think through what would it mean to be able to help someone get a new job, help promote someone else, help someone learn how to publish a book, help someone learn how to start their own podcast, help, right? Just how can you help? What can you do? What are the resources, your connections, your ability to even coach someone in doing better, right? Mentorship and allyship can absolutely tie together. So maybe, for instance, you are aware of like a young person who's starting in their career. How can you spend 15 minutes to help that person kind of navigate things and not have to make those same stumbles that you made in your career, right? Think through what are all the things you're coming to the table with, and then how you can impart that. And it can be a total game changer for someone else's life. It's not like, oh, do I have something to say? Yes, you have something to say. You've lived life. So there's an opportunity to impart your wisdom. There's an opportunity to be able to help people navigate things without as much trauma and pain that you had to experience. So why wouldn't you want to do that, right? Why wouldn't you want to help someone else? Okay. Action. I think people are, as I've been talking through this, probably are aware that, if you had to kind of think about allyship as an equation, allyship equals action. Because silence is complicit, right? When you hear something going on and you say nothing, that means you are in turn accepting the harm. And if you don't want to accept that harm, then you've got to say something. And mostly, it's not just speaking, but it can be advocating for new policies, say in the workplace. It can be helping to advocate to report something. It could be helping to advocate for creation of new resources, employee resource groups, affinity groups, leadership coaching. It could be a myriad of things. And that's like within the workplace. When you go into the life space, then it could be spending 5-10 hours a week volunteering. It could be donating. It could be joining, certain types of nonprofits or groups out here that are dedicating time and resources to help marginalized communities. There's a lot of ways you can help. The sitting in the space of like, I don't know, like what to do. Well, have you looked? Right? Like, have you tried? Because if you want to help, there are people who will take your time. There are people who will take your ability to mentor. If you have resources, additional income, there are ways, a myriad of ways that you can help. So please, please, please know that if that's your intention, there are spaces that will absolutely welcome that, and you'll be able to create impact and really have change. And then accountability. The beauty of allyship is that there's an opportunity then to hold actors who are, not maybe making the best choices or saying the best things accountable for what they're doing, because it's not enough to just keep saying, oh, that's just Johnny's way. No, that's not right. We're causing harm, right? If we're, again, think about whenever you interact with human beings, right? Virtually, in person, doesn't matter. Intent and impact, right? And whenever we have that misalignment of, well, I didn't mean to hurt their feelings, but you still cause harm. Nope. It is not okay to just shove that under a rug and just, oh, it is what it is. No, it is 2023 currently. Enough. Enough. No, enough. So what is the change behavior, and what do we need to document, within the workplace scenario of holding people accountable? Who needs cultural sensitivity training? Who needs executive coaching? Who needs to go through an understanding of what bias is? Whatever the learning gap deficiency is, we have to have absolute accountability to hold actors responsible, whether they meant it or not. Because if not, if you allow kind of bad actions to continue, especially within the workplace scenario, then that is modeling to everyone on the team that it's okay to hurt people. It's okay to live and act with bias. It's okay to live with bias, but it's not okay to use that bias, and that ends up hurting other people. You've got to have change behavior. So what to avoid as an ally? So again, I mentioned the me. This is a hard one because when you wake up, who do you think about first? With your mother, probably your baby, or those you take care of. But outside of that, you're like a close second, right? Me. And when you think through experiences and when people ask you questions, what do you first go to? Your experience. your bias, your beliefs, you. It's a me-centric world out there. And unfortunately, we don't live in a world where everyone looks just like you, understands you, reads your mind. Nope, none of that's happening. So we're all kind of coming to this table with the me. But how is that helpful for someone else who is experiencing something that maybe you've never experienced? How is that helpful for someone who's trying to share their story with you and you keep interrupting them because you're like, well, when I dealt with something completely not relevant, right? What? Pause, right? Let's get aligned. Let's understand it's not about me. It's, yeah, this party is not for me. This is for someone else. It's okay. It's okay if it's uncomfortable. It's okay if it makes you feel uncomfortable to hear someone else's trauma, someone else's struggle. That probably is an indicator that this is something that by you being a part of this, by you being brought to this, it's going to be an opportunity of learning, because human beings only learn when we're uncomfortable. We don't learn when we're comfortable. So as sad as that is, it's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for us to pause and figure out what is going to be the lesson out of this experience, and lean into that uncomfortability, lean into that space of maybe someone is sharing something with you and you have no clue how to deal with it. That's okay. Right? Allyship does not mean perfectionism, or you have lived all of life, you are now a genie and you're ready to command wishes. No. Or grant wishes. Absolutely not. You may absolutely be brought into a situation, hear someone out who's marginalized and is going through something, and maybe you don't know. That's okay. You can still first listen, right? You can ask questions if they are welcome to that experience, and then you can maybe go on this journey of discovery of what's next for that person. And maybe you're going to learn just as much as that person's going to learn through this journey. That's totally okay. But you know what's really meaningful? That person who's struggling, that person who's hurt, actually has someone who cares, actually has someone who's going to sit there and listen, because that is not guaranteed in this life. It is not guaranteed that you have someone to always listen to you, to support you and champion you. Absolutely not. So how wonderful would that be to then put yourself there to offer that help, to offer that lending ear, as well as if you are in a position to be able to effectuate change, to be able to advocate on behalf of that person. Now we're talking, right? Because now you're giving the support, you've given the listening, and booyah, here's some change now with it. It's a whole cake and icing and a candle on top. It's fantastic. Also, we want to make sure that we don't assume the expertise of what the person is telling you or how they're kind of going through things, much less even like assuming that you have the expertise to be able to help. Assumptions generally, I mean, most of us have learned this as a younger person, but happy to restate, assumptions are typically never going to be lending for a good outcome, because they are formulated from your bias, from your perspective, but that may not be in alignment or agreement with other situations or things going on in this life. So as opposed to jumping to a space of assumption, let's always kind of stay present in that space of, let me hear what is being said to me. Speak back what you are hearing, so that, again, you have alignment with what you're receiving. And is that in fact true to what was being said to you, what was communicated to you? And then kind of move forward with whatever change or next steps are needed. Performative allyship it's challenging, because it's kind of people putting themselves in a space where they're like, well, I want to help because I'm all about being woke. Okay. But it's, again, this isn't about rhetoric. This isn't about someone who's like, rah, like, I helped 10 people go and do this, and I have X amount of friends of color. And no. We're not doing that. We're not just out here to just go and say we're doing a good thing and we're changing the world to change the world, but we're actually having genuine, authentic impact of change and positivity. And maybe that doesn't involve you going on social media and sharing every single positive thing you did for the day, right? Like, maybe it's not about just like the talk, but it's actually more about the walk, right? And maybe that walk doesn't get publicized. Maybe it does. It's just going to be situationally dependent. But at the end of the day, making sure that we're genuinely really here to support each other, that we're genuinely really here to make sure that people feel safe, Psychological safety is again, another thing that can't be assumed in life or in your career. So how are we doing that? How are we showing up to make sure people feel safe? Because it is not guaranteed. And a lot of times for women, for people of color, for people who identify different in this world, that's one of the hardest things to establish in a space, workspace, life space, doesn't matter. Not feeling safe is easily achievable when people are saying things that are aggressive, saying things that are demeaning, saying things that are attacking of what you believe in or how you stand or orient in this life. And it's the first thing to go. And when people are not psychologically safe, what do? They shut down or they depart spaces, right? So we want to make sure that we can lend our allyship to make sure that people feel safe in all different types of spaces. And then another thing you wouldn't want to do as an ally is ignore feedback. So when you do say, are in positions to help others, say you've gone through an experience with someone, everything hopefully happened as it needed to and it went well, please take the time to have like a kind of an informal debrief with that person and understand that like how you practice allyship, like how was that received? Because a lot of times we do things in life and we don't take the time to be like, well, how was that? Right. And not from the space of like, I need you to pat me on the shoulder to tell me that I'm a good girl. Nope. More so from the space of like, did my help actually really help you? Was my help showing up in a way that you wanted and you needed? Because if it wasn't, shouldn't you know that? Shouldn't you understand so that in the future, when you have other circumstances that you're going through, you can maybe approach that situation a little bit different. Maybe you can learn that when someone tells you their pronoun and you continue to ignore them, and again, you're not doing it from that bad intent, but you're just doing it from the space of, well, it's just too hard and I don't want to, and I've called you this all your life. Well, yes, understandably, but it's not the best way to go about helping and supporting someone else. And do we as human beings have the right and the dignity to be called what we want to be called? Absolutely. So what are we doing to show up how people need us to show up, not how you want to show up? Because there's a difference. And if you don't get that feedback, that because you're just like, well, I did it and the situation was handled and they're better, that's a missed opportunity there. And we don't have to. We can always have that in the back of our minds as we're going through things to say, hey, as we work through things, let me make sure that we do that talk back, debrief. How did it go? What were the things that you felt most supported on? And what are things that I could support you better on? Right. And vice versa, because I do want to note that allies aren't just like, again, magical who never need support themselves. Like allies absolutely need allyship from others as well. And so making sure that as you're doing this for others, you also are getting this done for you, and that it's a kind of a two-way, three-way, four-way street situation happening. All right, so key opportunities to practice allyship. Workplace, obviously, especially where we live in a world or in a country, and we can just take from the US perspective, where there are people who are literally like just marginalized from a community size perspective, but also just likelihood of being able to have gotten over barriers to be in the workspace and be one of 10 that look like them. Super challenging to be the only person who looks like yourself in a room because you A, don't necessarily feel the safest, and B, question if you'll be heard, question if your statements and your propositions will be entertained or even acknowledged or respected, or you won't be constantly in a situation where you're feeling like you have to prove your value and why you think what you think matters and is true, because that is typically what happens with marginalized people in workspaces, especially when they are kind of one of one, and it's like, oh, okay, here we go. So deeply important to practice allyship there. Social settings, again, right? We're in life, we're at parties, we're doing things, and then that kind of really uncomfortable situation happens. Someone says something super off-putting. It's not okay to just, ooh, okay, and just go to, no, we have to pull people accountable. You can pull people to the side, especially the actors. You don't have to, kind of talk through challenging situations with an audience around you, because a lot of times people are going to be defensive and they're not going to want to really kind of uncover why they said what they said, did what they did. You can take it and you can practice allyship without the shaming or the belittling or the breakdown of another person, because people make mistakes, right? It's not always in that space of I intend to hurt, but it's the I hurt and I didn't know I was hurting. So we can give people grace as we help them learn how to be better without hurting them in the process. But there's that. Communities, again, similar to social settings. What are things going on in your communities? Do you feel like, you're engaged in, say, homeowners association type of stuff, or, your local charity work or faith-based things, or, there's so many different avenues within our communities, different communities we're a part of. Again, those moments where there are teachable moments where we can kind of correct language, correct questioning, correct bad behavior essentially, and help people unlearn bad things or things that they don't understand or triggering. And you can be in that position to, again, pull them to the side, talk through this, and then maybe the next time you see them, maybe they won't make that mistake again. And how impactful will that be for the people who now don't have to live with that added trauma that the people are doing in just kind of day-to-day lives? Okay. And then for those in, say, the educational space, we sometimes forget what our kids are going through in the school system. And, with social media, I would say that I don't know how other folks feel, but I have seen just a lot more transparency and a lot more visibility to bad behaviors that are happening in the school system. And as challenging as that is to see that, it's such a wonderful opportunity to start to correct behaviors, because again, teachers, like any other human being, make mistakes. No one is perfect. Perfection is a fiction. So they're making mistakes. Why? Maybe internal bias. Maybe they are struggling because when you're overloaded and you're dealing with a classroom of children, maybe folks aren't listening. Maybe it's really hard to kind of get through the lesson plan. There's a lot of things going on in the educational system. That's just like at the teacher level, much less principal and managers, right? All sorts of different functions and spaces where it can get just challenging. How are we making sure that those leaders, those people who are in charge of making sure our children are cared for, are protected, are taught, are also understandably keeping their minds open to how they speak to children, how they are engaging with our youth? Because the best and brightest of us are our children, right? That's the future of humanity. So if we aren't making sure that children are in safe spaces, that they are put in spaces that are allowing them to foster positivity, innovation, and also inclusive safety for all different folks that come into the educational space as children. They identify quite young, right? Like children are coming out and sharing their stories and their narratives. Are our educators in a position to be able to welcome that and to be able to foster that environment for them to thrive? It seems to me there's opportunities across the board, not any one state in mind, but there's across the board. There's a space for us to advocate better for children. There's a space to be able to help us have proper language when speaking with children, and also have children be heard. And making sure that they know that their thoughts are valuable and that it's welcome, and that also their thoughts can in turn create change as well. And that it's not that they're not just children, but these are human beings who have needs, and that they're in systems that are paying attention to those needs. And then our personal relationships. A lot of us, again, have friends of different background, people in our lives that come from different spaces than us. How are we practicing allyship with them? Because in essence, if you say you're someone's friend, then does that also not mean that there's a responsibility of allyship to them, right? And so when they're sharing kind of stories of trauma, stories of confusion, ambiguity, anything in between, sitting back or saying, wow, that's unfortunate, might not cut it, right? Like we might have to do a little bit more there. And maybe it's just listening, right? Maybe that's the space that they need. Do that. That's wonderful. But maybe there's an opportunity, especially for those who welcome it, to say, hey, help, I can help, right? And making sure that you're showing up for your friends, because friendship, of all the things that go into friendship, I think allyship is a beautiful, beautiful mold and melding into that. All right, some words of wisdom. Let's see, we're good on time. Yes. All right. So action, action, action. We have to take action. It is ongoing. It's not like, okay, I'm an ally. Tuesday, that's it, right? Like, no. Thursday, it's Friday, it's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, every day of the week, you got to show up as an ally. If that's something that's meaningful for you, but I would question that if you identify as a human being, that, you know, why wouldn't you also identify as being in a position to practice allyship? So if you are okay with that, then I think that this is a wonderful beginning conversation or ongoing learning for those already doing it to say, yep, and recommit to being better allies in life and in the workplace. Be willing to make mistakes. This is an important point because at the end of the day, you are not going to say everything correctly. Nope. I wish I did. Nope, not possible. But we can learn. We can be a little bit better. We can pay attention. We can keep learning to change and to unlearn the, you know, thoughts that maybe aren't as inclusive, strategies that aren't as helpful, right? Just keep being willing to learn, to ask for feedback, right? That those points of asking for feedback are one of the greatest ways that you can learn how you're being received. And even if you don't like that answer, doesn't mean you shouldn't hear it. Because we hear a lot of stuff in life that maybe we don't like, but you still can be better. And it's not okay to just be like, well, they never said anything, so I'm just going to keep going. We can be better. Inclusive language is everything. You know, everything from pronouns to also thinking through how we describe people, thinking through terms that may be triggering. For instance, a really easy thing to think about are two spaces, gender. So when we greet people, hey guys, well, is everyone in the room a male? Do you know that? Did they identify that to you? If they didn't, then why are you genderizing them and maybe incorrectly genderizing them? Maybe something to think about. Another thing could be triggering terms. So especially like say related to mental health, you know, this is so crazy. I struggle with this. I recently just said this on a podcast episode. I was like, oh. Right? Because we're so normalized to saying that word. And what's the problem with that? If someone is dealing with a mental health crisis and you're going on and touting about how people are crazy and what life is crazy, is it not triggering? Is it not challenging? And like I said, I literally just made this mistake. So right there with everyone who's like, how do you stop? You hold yourself accountable and you listen to the things you're saying in the world. And again, you're not going to shame yourself into being better. That's not going to produce or foster long-term positive change, but it's about acknowledging the mistake and then saying that word or doing that one thing one time less, right? 365 days of 1% of change is 365% of change, right? You can totally be practically a whole new person in a year if you constantly work, put in the work, put in the time and acknowledgement of what needs to happen. It's a journey. It's a journey. It's a journey. It's a journey. The same way you have to keep learning is the same way you also have to be patient with yourself, because maybe you won't enjoy the active allyship along the way fully in every aspect, in every scenario. That's okay. Right? Remember, human beings learn when things are a little bit more dicey for us, when things are a lot more uncomfortable than we're used to, when it forces us to have to work a little bit more. That's when things start getting really real in your mind. And that's when you start to really see some change for yourself. So please, please, please know this is a journey, not a destination, that we're working through things. And don't forget when you're practicing allyship, think of the person in the multifaceted way that they are, right? So human beings don't just show up in one thing or one way, but we have intersectionality of different things going on with us. So we have race, we have gender, we have sexual orientation, we have religion, we have ethnicity, we have education, we have all these different boxes that we exist within. So when we are practicing allyship, please acknowledge as an ally, but also as we're hearing stories, as we're taking in the information, that people are not going to just struggle because of one thing in their life, but maybe they're dealing with a trauma or a conflict that intersects different parts of who they are. And the importance of that is that it creates more complication for what's going on, but it's just a reality of life that sometimes it's the intersectionality of their existence, or of their authentic truth, that is causing the conflict, that is causing the trauma in life. And that we have to piece apart the different situations that are attacking the different identifiers, but then also understanding how to support the intersectionality of who they are. And then please don't give up. This is an important point, because it can be challenging to tackle bias, to tackle racism, to tackle homophobia, folks that just have hatred in their heart and are determined to tear someone down before they ever try to build them up. And sometimes it can feel downright exhausting. And you're like, I don't even know why I'm doing this, right? Sometimes you can even have conflict or strife with the person you're trying to help, because maybe they are so overwhelmed that they turn on you, right? Like, there's so many different avenues of challenge that you're going to face as an ally or someone who is in a position needing allyship, that it's just a lot going on. But please, please, please don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on the fact that you have a right in this world to be heard, to speak your truth, and to lend your support where you can, and to learn how to be better, to be a better advocate and better ally in this world. But it doesn't stop. And even if you fail, even if what you didn't work, doesn't mean that it might not work the next time, right? So just never giving up on yourself, never giving up on the situation, to be able to practice allyship, to believe in the best part of human beings, because human beings are quite remarkable, right? Even the ones that are putting challenging things out in the world, there's something beautiful about being a human. And maybe we don't always show the best sides of us in this world, but it doesn't mean that that person isn't redeemable. It doesn't mean that that person doesn't deserve an opportunity to change and to be better. But we have to have grace for ourselves and others, and we have to be consistent about it, because the minute we give up is where we then are, it's the same thing as accepting worse and less than what we should. Okay. Yes, so I think we're here. Any questions, any thoughts? Would love and welcome that. I'm gonna stop sharing.